The sound of high heels clicking against the polished floor echoed through the empty hallway as I walked into my office. It was late, and the building was quiet, but I couldn't sleep. Not after what had happened earlier that day. My mind was racing, my heart heavy with a mix of anger, betrayal, and determination. I sat down at my desk, the dim light from the lamp casting long shadows across the room. My fingers traced the edge of a leather-bound notebook, my mother's journal. It was the only thing I had left of her, and tonight, it felt like my only lifeline. My name is Clara Bennett, and at 32, I had built my life around my passion for fashion. My brand, Elysian, was more than just a label. It was my heart and soul. For the past 8 years, I had poured everything into it: late nights, endless sketches, and countless sacrifices. But today, everything had changed. It started with a phone call. My stepbrother, Ethan, had called me into a meeting at the company headquarters. I had no idea what to expect, but the moment I walked into that boardroom, I knew something was wrong. The air was thick with tension, and the faces around the table were grim. Ethan sat at the head of the table, his usual smug expression replaced by something colder, more calculating. "Clara," he began, his voice smooth, but laced with something I couldn't quite place. "We've made some decisions about the future of Elysian." I felt my stomach drop. "What kind of decisions?" I asked, my voice steady despite the unease creeping up my spine. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. "The board has decided that Elysian needs a new direction, a fresh perspective. And as the majority shareholder, I've decided to take over as creative director." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what he was saying. "You're taking over Elysian?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "It's for the best, Clara. The brand needs to evolve, and frankly, your vision is outdated." Outdated. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought of the countless hours I had spent perfecting every detail of my designs, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices. And now, Ethan was dismissing it all with a single word. "And what about me?" I asked, my voice trembling now. "What happens to me?" Ethan shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "You can stay on as a consultant if you'd like. But honestly, Clara, I think it's time for you to step back. Let someone else take the reins." I felt the room spin around me. This couldn't be happening. Elysian was my life, my dream. And now, Ethan was taking it away from me, just like that. I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me. "You can't do this," I said, my voice rising. "This is my brand. My vision. You have no right." Ethan cut me off with a sharp laugh. "I have every right, Clara. I'm the majority shareholder. And let's be honest, you've been holding Elysian back for years. It's time for a change." I wanted to scream, to lash out, to do something, anything, to stop this from happening. But I knew it was pointless. Ethan had the board on his side, and there was nothing I could do to change their minds. I left the meeting in a daze, my mind racing. How had it come to this? How had Ethan, who had never shown the slightest interest in fashion, suddenly become the savior of Elysian? And why had the board agreed to this? It didn't make sense. But as I sat in my office that night, staring at my mother's journal, I realized something. Ethan hadn't just taken Elysian from me. He had taken my legacy, my connection to my mother. Elysian had been named after her favorite flower, the one she used to grow in our garden when I was a child. It was more than just a brand. It was a tribute to her, to everything she had taught me about beauty, resilience, and strength. And now it was gone. But as I sat there, feeling the weight of my loss, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to let Ethan destroy everything I had worked for. I wasn't going to let him erase my mother's memory. If he thought he could take Elysian from me, he was wrong. Dead wrong. I opened my mother's journal, flipping through the pages until I found what I was looking for, a list of names and numbers, written in her elegant handwriting. These were her old contacts, people she had worked with during her own career as a designer. People who owed her favors. I picked up my phone and dialed the first number on the list. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Clara? Is that you?" It was Madame Laurent, one of my mother's closest friends and a legendary figure in the fashion industry. Her voice was warm, filled with the kind of strength and wisdom that had always inspired me. "Yes, it's me," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I need your help." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Madame Laurent spoke again, her voice firm and resolute. "Tell me what you need, Clara. I'm here for you." And just like that, I began to rebuild. Piece by piece, contact by contact, I started to lay the foundation for something new. Something better. Ethan thought he had one, but he had no idea what I was capable of. He had no idea the fire he had ignited inside me. Over the next few weeks, I worked tirelessly, reaching out to every connection I had, every person who had ever believed in me. My assistant, Mia, stayed by my side, her loyalty unwavering. Together, we began to piece together a new vision, one that was bolder, more authentic, and more powerful than anything I had ever created before. But it wasn't easy. There were moments when I wanted to give up, when the weight of everything felt too heavy to bear. But then I would think of my mother, of the strength she had always shown, and I would push forward. I had to. For her. For me. And then, one night, as I sat in my apartment surrounded by sketches and fabric samples, my phone buzzed with a text from Madame Laurent. "Everything is arranged. Paris awaits you. Your mother would be proud." I felt tears well up in my eyes as I read the message. Paris. The city of dreams. The city where my mother had always said I would find my true self. And now it was where I would make my stand. The next few months were a blur of activity. While Ethan paraded around New York, giving interviews about his exciting new direction for Elysian, I was quietly building something extraordinary. My new workshop, hidden in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, buzzed with energy as my loyal team worked on what would become our debut collection. Mia kept tabs on Elysian through her industry contacts, and the reports weren't surprising. Ethan's fresh vision consisted mainly of copying other designers' work, and the quality of the brand was declining rapidly. The fall collection was a disaster, and retailers were starting to pull out. Meanwhile, whispers began to circulate about a mysterious new designer preparing something extraordinary for Paris Fashion Week. Ethan, caught up in his perceived victory, paid no attention to these murmurs. But I knew better. I knew that the fashion world was about to be turned upside down. 3 months after being forced out of Elysian, I received another call from Madame Laurent. "Everything is set, Clara. The slot at Paris Fashion Week is yours. Show them what real fashion looks like." That evening, as I stood in my workshop surrounded by the beginnings of my new collection, I finally allowed myself to smile. Ethan thought he had destroyed me, but he had actually given me the push I needed to create something far more meaningful. 6 months after being ousted from Elysian, I stood in my Brooklyn workshop, surrounded by what would become my redemption. The space hummed with the sound of sewing machines and quiet conversation as my team worked tirelessly on our debut collection. Every stitch, every seam, was a step closer to Paris. "Clara, you need to see this," Mia called from her desk, turning her laptop screen toward me. The headline made my stomach turn. "Elysian faces quality complaints as major retailers consider pulling out." The article detailed how the brand, my brand, was struggling under its new leadership. Ethan's lack of experience was showing, and the photos accompanying the piece showed poorly constructed garments and derivative designs that bore little resemblance to the quality Elysian had once been known for. "They're destroying everything we built," Mia said quietly. I shook my head, returning to the intricate beadwork I'd been supervising. "They're destroying everything they stole," I corrected her. "What we built is right here." The truth was, watching Elysian's decline hurt more than I wanted to admit. It was like seeing someone slowly dismantle your childhood home. But I couldn't afford to dwell on it. Not with Paris Fashion Week just 5 months away. My phone buzzed with a text from Madame Laurent. "Just saw the latest Elysian pieces. Catastrophe. But your samples? Magnificent. The buyers are already asking questions." I smiled, thinking about the carefully orchestrated whispers we'd been feeding into the fashion grapevine. The industry thrived on mystery and anticipation, and we were giving them exactly that. No one knew I was behind the new label yet. All they knew was that something extraordinary was coming. That afternoon, I had a meeting with Marie Chin, a buyer from one of the most prestigious department stores in Paris. She had flown in specifically to see our progress, having heard rumors about our collection. "These pieces," she said, running her fingers over a hand-beaded evening gown, "they tell a story. Each one is like a chapter in a book. I can't wait to finish reading." I watched as she examined the craftsmanship, noting how her eyes widened at certain details. This wasn't just fashion. It was artistry. Emotion translated into fabric and form. Every piece carried echoes of my journey, strength disguised as elegance, resilience masked as beauty. "The market is hungry for something real," Marie continued. "Something with soul. Elysian used to have that, but now," she shrugged eloquently, "the latest collection feels empty. But this," she gestured to the workshop, "this is what fashion should be." After she left, I received an email that made my heart race. The Chambre Syndicale de la Haute Couture had reviewed our preliminary submissions. We were officially approved for the Haute Couture segment of Paris Fashion Week, a rare honor for a new label. That evening, as I was leaving the workshop, I quite literally ran into my father outside the building. The shock on his face told me he hadn't known this was where I'd been working. "Clara," he said, looking confused. "What are you doing here?" I straightened my spine, meeting his gaze. "Working, Dad. Something you might want to remind Ethan about." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I know things have been difficult, but Ethan assures me he's learning quickly." "The transition has been disastrous," I supplied. "Yes, I've seen the reviews." "Was it worth it, Dad? Trading your daughter's dream for your stepson's approval?" "Clara, that's not fair. We're still family." "Family?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Family doesn't destroy what someone spent a decade building. Family doesn't stand by while their child's work is stolen. "But you know what? Thank you. Thank you," he repeated, bewildered. "Yes, because if you and Ethan hadn't shown me exactly who you are, I might never have found the courage to do this." I gestured to the workshop behind me. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." I left him standing there, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. Let him wonder. Let him worry. The time for explanations was long past. Back in my apartment that night, I received another call from Mia. "Ethan's trying to track down our suppliers," she reported. "He's figured out something's happening, but he doesn't know what." I smiled, thinking of the contracts I'd secured through my mother's old connections. Let him try. Those relationships weren't built with money. They were built with trust and respect, two things Ethan knows nothing about. The next few weeks were crucial as we finalized the collection. News of Elysian's troubles continued to mount. Ethan's attempts to copy other designers had resulted in several legal threats, and his response, throwing lawyers and money at the problem, only made things worse. One morning, I arrived at the workshop to find an unexpected visitor waiting. It was Isabel Romano, one of the most influential fashion journalists in the industry. "I hope you don't mind the ambush," she said, rising from her seat. But when I heard whispers about what was happening here, I had to see for myself. I knew Isabel from my Elysian days. She had been one of the first to recognize my talent. More importantly, she had been my mother's friend. "Your mother would be proud," she said, looking around the workshop. "She always said you would surpass her. And now I see it. This collection, it's not just fashion. It's a statement." As she toured the workshop, examining pieces and talking with my team, I could see her piecing the story together. Isabel had always been known for her ability to spot not just trends, but narratives in the fashion world. "You're not just creating clothes," she said finally. "You're creating redemption. This is your response to what happened at Elysian, isn't it?" I nodded, seeing no point in denying it. Everything they took from me taught me something. Every betrayal made these designs stronger. Isabel's article appeared 2 weeks later. While it didn't name me directly, it painted a compelling picture of a phoenix rising from the ashes of corporate greed and hinted at a debut that would shake the foundations of Paris Fashion Week. The response was immediate. Industry insiders began speculating about the mysterious new designer, and buyers started reaching out, trying to secure appointments during Paris Fashion Week. Ethan must have read the article too, because the next day I received my first direct contact from him since the takeover. The email was brief but telling. Whatever you're planning, remember who still controls the Elysian name. Don't do anything you'll regret. I forwarded the email to my lawyer without responding. Ethan's threat was empty. He might control the Elysian name, but he couldn't control what was coming. 3 months before Paris Fashion Week, we began final fittings. The collection had evolved into something even more powerful than I had initially envisioned. Each piece carried elements of my journey, structures that seemed delicate but proved unbreakable, designs that revealed hidden strength in unexpected places. The centerpiece was a gown that told my entire story. At first glance, it appeared to be a simple black dress. But as the wearer moved, layers of color and texture were revealed, like truth emerging from darkness. The beading pattern, visible only under certain lights, spelled out "Rise" in my mother's handwriting, taken from one of her old design sketches. Ethan must have been feeling the pressure because he began making desperate moves. He tried to poach members of my team, offering double their salaries. Not one accepted. Money isn't everything, my head seamstress told me after turning down Ethan's offer. Some things matter more. Like loyalty and respect. 2 months before Paris, we received word that Elysian was struggling to complete their collection. Ethan had resorted to hiring freelance designers to fill the gaps left by his inadequate leadership, but the results were disjointed and uninspired. Ethan and his team would find out soon enough. But first, they'd have to watch as their stolen kingdom crumbled around them. Paris in September was exactly as my mother had described it, a city that breathed fashion and exhaled art. Standing in the atelier Madame Laurent had arranged for our final preparations, I watched the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and rose. The schedule just leaked, Mia announced, rushing in with her tablet. We're showing right after Elysian. Ethan must be furious. All the major buyers and press will be there to see both shows. I smiled, remembering Madame Laurent's wink when he told me about the scheduling. Perfect timing. The fashion world was buzzing with anticipation. Our mysterious new label had become the talk of the week, with speculation reaching a fever pitch. Meanwhile, Elysian's pre-show coverage was less than flattering. Sources say the collection is desperately uneven, Mia read from her phone. Many pieces appear rushed or poorly executed. Industry insiders question whether the brand can recover from its recent decline. Our own collection hung ready, each piece perfect, each detail meticulously executed. 3 days before the show, Isabel Romano visited our atelier for an exclusive preview. My God, she whispered, touching the centerpiece gown. This isn't just fashion. It's justice served on silk and lace. On the morning of our show, I received an unexpected text from my father. Elysian's rehearsal was a disaster. Ethan's crying. He's threatening everyone. Please, tell me you know what you're doing. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on our final preparations. The models were ready, the music selected, the lighting perfectly designed. Everything had to be flawless. 2 hours before showtime, Mia burst into my dressing room. You need to see this, she said, pulling up a live stream on her phone. The Elysian show was underway, and it was worse than anyone expected. Ethan's collection was a disaster of mismatched influences and poor execution. The models looked uncomfortable, the clothes ill-fitting. In the front row, Ethan's face grew increasingly rigid as whispers spread through the audience. He's ruined the brand, Mia whispered. No, I corrected her. They ruined it together. As Elysian's show ended to tepid applause, our team sprang into action. The venue would be reset for our show in less than an hour. I watched from backstage as the audience remained seated, unwilling to lose their spots for the most anticipated show of the week. Ethan and his team stayed in the front row, their faces a study in contrasts, Ethan near tears, his smugness replaced by desperation. They still didn't know what was coming. The lights dimmed, the music began, a hauntingly beautiful piece my mother used to play while designing. And then, magic happened. Our first model emerged in a creation that made the audience audibly gasp. Each piece that followed told part of our story: resilience, rebirth, revenge, served with impeccable style. The craftsmanship was undeniable, the creativity unmatched. From my position backstage, I could see Ethan's face as he slowly realized what he was watching. The designs carried echoes of my style but were elevated, evolved. This wasn't just a collection. It was a statement of survival. The centerpiece gown drew an unprecedented reaction as the model turned, revealing the hidden rise beading. Cameras flashed frantically. In the front row, Isabel Romano was smiling, tears in her eyes. For the finale, all the models returned to the runway, creating a living gallery of artistry and defiance. The applause was deafening. And then, the moment came. As tradition dictated, the designer needed to take a bow. I stepped onto the runway, and the room went silent for a moment before erupting into even louder applause. Ethan's face went pale. His mouth fell open. Isabel Romano was the first to stand, triggering a standing ovation that seemed to shake the venue. Fashion editors were already typing frantically on their phones. Buyers were signaling their assistance. I walked the length of the runway, stopping directly in front of Ethan. "Thank you for teaching me to rise," I said, just loud enough for him to hear over the applause. The aftermath was immediate. Buyers swarmed backstage. Orders were placed. Exclusive contracts were offered. But the real satisfaction came from watching Ethan try to slip out unnoticed, only to be confronted by journalists asking about his connection to the designer who had just triumphed. Madame Laurent embraced me backstage. "Your mother would be so proud. You have not just survived. You have soared." The post-show press conference was electric. Journalists wanted to know everything about my departure from Elysian, about the inspiration behind the new collection, about what came next. Sometimes, I told them, losing everything shows you what you're truly capable of creating. As hashtags trended and orders flooded in, Mia showed me the first online reviews. "Historic debut. A star reborn. The future of fashion has a new name." Ethan's carefully constructed world was crumbling, and he knew it. His phone calls went straight to voicemail. His emails remained unanswered. His power had always been borrowed. Mine was earned. The next morning, as Paris Fashion Week continued, the true impact of our show became clear. Major retailers were already canceling their Elysian orders, choosing instead to invest in my new label. The industry had spoken. "What happens now?" Mia asked as we watched the sunrise over Paris. I smiled, thinking of all the designs still waiting to be brought to life. "Now," I said, "we build something true. The fashion world is built on beauty, but it stands on truth." Ethan had tried to steal my legacy, but he had only succeeded in forcing me to create something far more powerful: my own destiny.